Welcome back, everybody. And if you've just tuned in, my name's Duncan Edwards. I'm the CEO of British American Business. And it's a real pleasure for me to welcome you all to our next session and our very special guest, John Glen, MP. John is the MP for Salisbury in the UK, but much more importantly for our discussion today, he's the UK government minister with responsibility for all things to do with financial services. As the economic secretary to the Treasury and city minister, he covers a huge range of issues, including all financial regulation, financial stability and the relationship with the PRA, financial probity and the relationship with the FCA, taxation of financial institutions, green finance, which of course is a huge issue for us in this conference, which we'll be covering tomorrow, and a whole lot more. So, Minister, thank you very much for joining us today. Our format will be that the Minister will make some remarks for 10 minutes or so, and then I'll come back to dig a little bit more deeply into some of those issues with some questions. So, Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Duncan, and thank you to the British American Business Transatlantic Finance Forum for inviting me to speak. Firstly, I'd like to extend warm congratulations to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for winning this election with more votes than any candidate in US democratic history. That's an amazing achievement, and the 150 million strong turnout, I think, sends a very powerful message to the world about the strength of US democracy. And obviously here in the UK, we look forward very much to working with the new administration on our shared priorities. But of course, we'll be collaborating closely with the US through the UK's presidencies of COP26 and the G7 next year. The US-UK partnership has led to immeasurable gains for our people for many years, and it surely will bring many benefits for many years into the future. So we're very much looking forward to engaging with the President-elect and his team on the free trade agreement between our two nations, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But while change is coming to the US, the same is true here in the United Kingdom. And as we move into January, we'll mark the end of the transition period. And we'll see this as the start of a new chapter for UK financial services also. Last week, the UK Chancellor turned the first page in that new chapter by setting out his vision for the industry's future. It's a vision in which we harness the power of financial services to renew this country's reputation as a forward and outward-looking economy. Somewhere where the best people and most dynamic firms want to come and do business, but where consumers are also served and supported. And last week, the Chancellor also set out new policies in 3 areas that underpin this vision: openness, technology, and green finance. I'll talk briefly about some of the areas that might be of greatest interest, I hope, to you. Firstly, openness. We're really serious about being the most open, competitive, and innovative place for financial services in the world. And to achieve that, we're going to undertake a series of reviews to ensure our regulation enhances our attractiveness. And we're also launching a call for evidence on the UK's overseas firms regime to ensure that it supports our position as an open global financial centre. And on that note, let me add that the UK is committed to providing stability and continuity for overseas firms, which is why we've incorporated nearly all existing EU equivalence determinations for third countries into our UK law. And this will allow firms whose business with us is underpinned by these decisions to continue on the same basis as they did during the UK's membership of the European Union. We also announced last week a package of equivalence decisions for the EU and EEA member states. And that was to provide clarity and stability to industry, including in the US, and to support the openness of the sector. Alongside those decisions, we're publishing an equivalence guidance document setting out our approach, but that's not all. We're also going to set out plans to boost the number of new companies that can list in the UK by establishing a task force that will propose reforms to the current UK listing regime. This should allow us to attract the most innovative and successful firms while helping companies to grow. I'll turn now to the next area of policy that I mentioned, technology. We're keenly anticipating the recommendations of our FinTech review that should help us build on our existing considerable strengths in this area, developing a domestic skills base while also reducing barriers to foreign talent and addressing the challenge of attracting growth funding. And I'm always interested to hear your views about how we can seize the benefits and mitigate the risks of this new world. In addition, we're launching a consultation on our regulatory approach to stablecoins. This digital currency could make payments cheaper and faster. However, it's absolutely critical that we adhere to the same minimum standards as other payment methods. And finally, I'd like to say a few words about green finance. And as the Chancellor said last week, this new chapter for financial services means putting our full weight of private sector innovation, expertise and capital behind the global effort to tackle climate change. And as we prepare to host the COP26 UN climate conference next year and the G7 conference, we have a real chance to shape the agenda in this critical area. Last week, we said we would introduce mandatory requirements by 2025 for UK firms to disclose their climate risks, with many of these requirements in place within just 3 years. This is the first step in sparking the green financial services innovation of tomorrow, and to help the UK meet its 2050 net zero target and other wider environmental objectives. This government has announced its intention to issue its first sovereign green bond next year, obviously subject to market conditions. I think these measures together underline how the UK's financial services sector is ready to play an even bigger role on the world stage. And now more than ever, as we respond to the challenges posed by COVID-19, a close US and UK bilateral economic relationship is vital for prosperity, for growth and security in both our countries. In 1946, Winston Churchill first used the term special relationship to illustrate the shared values that bind our nations together. And today, I think we could equally apply the term to the connections between our financial services industries. A relationship that is based on the depth, sophistication, and interconnectedness of our markets and regulatory systems, and our shared values as the two leading financial centres in the world. The end of the transition period is an opportunity for our nations to work even closer together, to set a global gold standard in financial services collaboration. It's also a chance to set the direction of global financial regulatory developments so that it reflects our mutual objectives and priorities. I said earlier that I'd talk in more depth about the UK-US free trade agreement negotiations, and I'll turn to that topic now. I think we've already made significant progress in those talks, and we believe that we're in a strong position to move forward. Financial services have been a constant theme throughout the negotiations, and we're seeking to set the highest possible standards for what FTAs can achieve for the sector. And that means going beyond existing precedents such as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. We also want to explore how the FTA can complement and facilitate greater collaboration between regulators and build on existing tools to foster long-term cooperation initiatives between the UK and the US. I know the industry on both sides of the Atlantic, including some of you here today, have consistently emphasised the value of UK-US regulatory dialogue. And you've also come up with lots of ideas about how we can achieve greater cooperation on this front. I'd urge you to keep sharing your thoughts on these important points. We too are keen to see the relationship between our regulators develop further. And I'm pleased that we've made some significant progress through the UK-US Financial Regulatory Working Group. I heard from my officials that a very productive meeting held by the group just a few weeks ago last month, in which it discussed a whole range of issues from the global response to COVID-19 to sustainable finance. And while the working group has only been in operation for 2 years, I'm delighted to say that it's already had some notable successes. That includes the creation of the UK-US Financial Innovation Partnership, which seeks to deepen bilateral engagement on emerging trends in financial services innovation. So I hope today I've been able to share some sense of the vision and the scale of our ambitions. And while our financial service sectors have achieved a great deal together, I'm very confident that over the coming months and years, they will accomplish even more and play their part in deepening that special relationship and warm friendship that our nations proudly share. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today.
Well, thank you, Minister, for that very broad-ranging speech and opening remarks where you covered a lot of ground. And if I may, I'd like to just dig in a little bit on some of the things that you discussed. And it's kind of interesting. If we'd been having this discussion a year ago or the 2 or 3 years before that, it would have been inevitable that the implications of Brexit would have kind of impinged on every session that we had had. Of course, over the last year, other things have pushed Brexit off the front pages and off the city pages of the newspapers. But I would like to just dig in a little bit as we come towards the end of the transition period about the settlement that you and the British government would like to see coming from the negotiations with the EU in regards to financial services. You talked a little bit about the package of equivalence decisions that the UK has put forward for from its side, but what about from the EU side? So where do things stand at the moment as you see it? How optimistic are you for the outcome of these next couple of weeks of talks?
Well, thank you. Obviously, it's very difficult for me to speak precisely about exactly where we are with the EU Free Trade Agreement negotiations. There are obviously a wide set of conversations that are ongoing at the moment. But I'm always optimistic, and I start from the premise that we have a shared heritage with the EU with respect to financial services regulations. We've been at the table, often refining and leading the formation and the finalization of directives. And so, we see this equivalence process of decision making, that it should be a technical one. I mean, we have an instinct that we should be looking at outcome-based approach. So we look at things on a technical basis, but we found it quite straightforward to make those equivalence judgments. We've cooperated fully with the EU, and we've provided, I think, 2,500 pages of responses to their 17 questionnaires several months ago. But obviously, in any process like this, it will be up to the EU to make those determinations as they see fit. And, we respect their right to do so. But the Chancellor's announcements last week demonstrate that in all circumstances, we will do what we need to do for the healthy future of the UK financial services industry. And obviously, we want to be able to be a continuing global hub and centre of economic activity in financial services. And indeed, I think that's in the interests of the remaining EU countries who need access to our deep liquid capital markets. And notwithstanding periodic attempts to suggest that there will be great surges in movement to Paris or Frankfurt or Dublin or Luxembourg or wherever, I think it's it's just a fact that London has a unique quality of being a hub of financial services, bringing lots of competencies together. So we will look to be constructive with our friends and trading partners in the EU, and obviously, as this negotiation concludes, I hope we'll get into a good place where we can build on the shared heritage that we have, even if we will actually, potentially do things slightly differently. I think with the same focus on high standards in the UK and also prizing systemic stability and making a leading contribution on global regulatory standards going into the future.
Yes, it's so interesting. I mean, when we held our conference last, which was actually 18 months ago in New York City, I mean, the sense was that for US financial institutions that had a big presence in the UK, I mean, essentially Brexit had already happened. I mean, the institutions hadn't hung about in terms of making their restructuring decisions in order to become able to do business in the EU. And the sense was that a few functions had moved, a little bit of capital had moved, but nothing like the predictions. Some of the predictions that have been made prior to the referendum. Are you confident that the UK will, and London in particular, will remain the destination of choice for US financial institutions?
Well, your characterization of what actually happened versus what the predictions were being made 3 years ago is, I think, very accurate. And I've never been complacent. I've been the minister for 3 years, and I've seen different things written at different times. What I've tried to do is to focus on what was necessary in the uncertainty of last year to have a fully functioning regulatory environment for all circumstances, and then to build from that as we've gone through the transition period and the negotiation this year. I do think there's enormous resilience to the City of London, and I think it's the interests of US institutions for that to continue and for us to continue to be a global hub. And obviously we compete with New York, but we see ourselves as a global center of financial services, not just a European center of financial services. And we, as I said in my earlier remarks, we've set out a way that we want to maintain those high standards, but also reserve the right to adopt slightly different approaches on that outcome-based model that actually work for the industry that exists as it exists in the UK, working with the opportunities of innovation and new technologies as they exist.
So we've been, just switching gears, we've obviously been working closely with your colleagues in the DIT and their counterparts here at USTR and Commerce on the free trade negotiations. And of course, we've been ardent advocates for a free trade agreement. There is clearly risk that doesn't get done for various reasons with the change of administration and just time pressure. But what would you like to see actually inside an FTA? I mean, is an FTA necessary in order to get the kind of financial regulatory cooperation that both sides would like to see? Is it a nice to have or a must have? I mean, where do you sit on that?
Well, I think we can be very confident that the deep and enduring regulatory cooperation that we have through the Financial and Regulatory Working Group sets the foundations for a very solid relationship going forward. And the success of the meeting on the 20th of October really underscored the opportunities and the scope for future development. We'll see where we get to. Again, it's difficult to comment on live negotiations. And I note your observations around, there are always risks at a time of political transition. But I think, as the Prime Minister made clear in his conversations with President-elect Biden last week, there is the scope for a very positive relationship where, we have got a shared agenda on the climate change and the context for that relationship as we approach the chairing of the G7 and COP26 next year is very strong. But it would be wrong for me to start speculating about the content of the free trade agreement. But I did say in my remarks, look, there are precedents that we should aim to go beyond. I had the privilege of meeting the US ambassador at his residence a few weeks ago, talking about fintech and the opportunities that exist there. We will continue to look constructively on the basis of as I said, shared instincts, shared common approach to regulation, and the need to be as forward-thinking and embracing of new trends as we can.
Yeah, I mean, we're part of the British American Finance Alliance that SIFMA and City UK and Corporation of London and others have set up. And, I think that the point that they're making is, regardless of what happens with the free trade agreement, the role of the Financial Regulatory Working Group is going to be crucial. If a deal can be done, terrific. But if it can't be done, then that working group, the dialogue between the two regulators, the two treasuries, and encouraging regulators to cooperate, should continue. Do you think there's a way that business can make sure it's plugged into that process going forward?
Yes, I think those channels are open and mature, and they're deepening all the time. And as I say, we will see what comes of the FTA. But in all circumstances, there'll always be a good set of options for making progress. And we've always been as expansive as we can. We've taken that approach with other jurisdictions, but for our oldest friends, that's a very easy conversation to keep live and keep deep.
Just switching to green finance and the busy year that the UK government's going to have next year with the G7 and COP26. How would you characterize where kind of the industry is at the moment in terms of it taking on the responsibility for kind of behavior change in sustainability and green finance? Clearly, we've had Larry Fink speaking here at our conference, who BlackRock have obviously made their position very clear about sustainability and climate. And it seems to us, as we go around the industry, that this is right at the top of the agenda for every institution at the moment. I'm just curious, how much do you think governments around the world need to mandate change, and how much do you think will come from the industry itself?
Well, I think that there are obviously some differences in view, but I think there's an emerging consensus of the nature of this challenge, from the Paris Agreement remit, really, to really make aggressive interventions to actually give us the prospect of reaching those goals. And I think that what our Chancellor set out last week in terms of the intention to introduce these fully mandatory TCFD aligned requirements across the economy by 2025, with a significant amount of mandatory elements by 2023, was our attempt to really try and show some leadership in that area. Because I think that we need to build a consensus, but we need to build a consensus around measures that are actually going to be meaningful and take us to achieve those goals. I think that there is a lot of conversation that needs to be taken at a collaborative level, at an international level, and in a way that actually deals with some of the challenges around a regular taxonomy, around a pathway to achieving these outcomes. And I think it'll be great to have the new president taking a leadership role in that and convening collaborative discussions, which we'll be extremely pleased to be participating in, given the announcements we've made.
Well, it does seem that one of his first acts will be rejoining the Paris Accord, according to everything we've heard from the transition team. So it certainly looks like the United States is going to be kind of more aligned, I would say, with the UK on these issues than perhaps it has been in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Minister, I'm gonna draw this discussion to a close, and thank you very much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate you taking some time. I know it's a very busy schedule for you, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you.